I am a fanatic for horror, regardless of the medium. There is just something so engaging about the worlds built in this genre, at least when it comes to the more novel horror experiences. I remember cowering away in my basement while booting Penumbra for the first time, hiding from both my parents and whatever monsters lay dormant in the underparts of my household. Of course, I now know that there was no hellspawn waiting to butcher me, but I do believe that this example displays the genre's ability to plant lingering thoughts in the consumer's mind. I'm absolutely not referring to your dime a dozen cash grab horror movies either. Those movies only have one real intention, and that's to throw a few trashy jump scares at the viewer before leaving no real lasting impression. I am talking about the creative and expectation-defying horror experiences. The kind of horror that makes you question how it's possible for someone to come up with a world so twisted and so foreign to anything in reality. These are the experiences worth talking about, and luckily enough for us, there are many great gaming experiences to immerse yourself within right now that exhibit this style of horror. To limit the scope of this video, I would like to discuss the titles that are slightly more ambiguous in nature. In my experience, I have always found that titles which don't fully clue the observer into the cause of the horror do a more effective job at creating a long-lasting impression. With this in mind, I would like to talk about the shorter and more shrouded horror video games that have had a lasting impact on me. Of course, I still can't cover all of the games within this even smaller subset of horror, but I will try my best to give a few games that I like some much-deserved recognition. Just as a quick side note, there will be severe spoilers for all the following games, so if you hadn't had a chance to experience these titles and you intend to, there are timestamps for you to skip certain sections in the description. Now moving along. Iron Lung is both highly regarded and well known. This makes it an excellent title to start with, as it clues you into what kind of game I'm trying to discuss today. Iron Lung is an immensely popular title, so much so that Markiplier has decided to create a whole film surrounding it. With this impending cinematic universe coming into fruition, I want to give a disclaimer that there may not be any remaining mystery around the game in the coming years. As of right now though, this is quite the curious title. Iron Lung starts by telling the player that all habitable planets and all who resided on them have inexplicably disappeared. This event, known as the Quiet Rapture, left only those who were on space stations and smaller ships around for the start of the game. You, the player, are a prisoner of this space coalition who was promised your freedom upon the exploration of a specific moon of interest. The problem is that this aforementioned moon has recently acquired an ominous sea of what appears to be human blood on its surface. Luckily enough for you though, this spacefaring coalition has found you worthy enough to discover answers in this new body of fluid. They aren't sure what's down there, and the last prisoner they sent down, he did not come back up. So good luck down there. After this vague introduction, you are sent down in this metal sarcophagus which they've aptly named the Iron Lung. This machine has no usable windows or exit ports of any kind. It contains eerie messages sprawled all over its interior, which definitely makes you feel at home in this death pod. The only assets you have are a computer database, a fire extinguisher, a navigation system, and a camera. Other than that, you are entirely on your own. This premise does a great job at intriguing the player into the game's universe, leaving them with a desire to discover answers on how all known habitable planets have come to disappear. I would also like to note that the Iron Lung itself is a great tool for horror. It keeps the outside world shrouded in mystery, leaving the player's imagination piqued throughout the experience. The vessel that you are in will shake violently and break down over the course of your playthrough, making this the perfect setting for a claustrophobic and anxiety-inducing horror experience. You don't know what's out there, and to be quite honest, it may be better off that way. The game abruptly ends with and no real answers. The player dies, just like the moon's previous explorer. None of the footage you captured will result to anything. It never reached the coalition, making your journey pointless. The only solace that the player can take by the game's conclusion is that they're told that there may be answers to this disappearing event somewhere in the universe. But that's it. That's the whole game. It ends providing no real answers to anything. What caused this moon's valleys to be filled with blood? We don't know. What killed the player? We don't really know. What caused this quiet rapture? We still don't know. All these unanswered questions leave this game shrouded in mystery, and we don't understand how to think of it by its end. This may not leave an incredibly satisfying experience for the player, but it does leave them with this intrigue, keeping them asking questions long after the game's conclusion. If the game were longer, its mechanics would become tired and uninteresting by its end. Its narrative is also not nearly fleshed out enough to support a longer title. Iron Lung's brevity is the sole reason that it's as popular as it is. It's also this brevity that allows the world to be so interesting, as we all know that if we were given any real answers, the game wouldn't be nearly as intriguing for the player. If Iron Lung was claustrophobic and terrifying due to elements unseen by the player, then I would say that Scanner Sombre is a much more open and soothing experience to a certain extent. The game starts with no context provided whatsoever. You just wake up. You find yourself in a tent, with everything surrounding it shrouded by darkness. You receive no indication on what may lie outside of your campgrounds, except for a small red blinking light. This light turns out to be some sort of portable scanner, allowing you to explore what you now know are caves which you dwell within. It projects visual markers around the surrounding environment, allowing the player to traverse these dingy areas with relative ease. It's quite beautiful, in fact, sometimes allowing the player to be taken aback by the environments they find themselves within. The markers projected in front of the player mostly strip the cave of its gloomy characteristics, making it a much more welcoming environment than it otherwise would be. You may be thinking that all of this makes Scanner Sombre seem out of place in a video about brief horror experiences, until it decides to fit right in. It turns out that these are caves which have housed generations of trauma and pain for all who have decided to enter it. Many have died here, whether it be at the hands of cultists, a fatal accident, or some sort of equipment malfunction. Many have seen their peril in these chasms. This is the source of the horror, as the scanner has this impossible ability to view the ghosts of those who have met their demise within these caves. They're shadows to the player, and all that remains of them are their lifeless poses from moments before they passed. The protagonist makes subtle comments throughout the entire experience, hinting at their distaste for these grounds. He even clues the player into the fact that the terrain may be cursed in some manner. This disdain that the protagonist has for these caves is cryptic for most of the game, only becoming clearer in the game's final moments. It turns out that you're part of this curse, having died in these caves not too long before the start of the game. You are one of these ghosts, seeing this only for yourself in the very final scene before the game decides to restart. It's a vicious cycle. You relive these moments for eternity, wondering the same thoughts over and over again. You will never be at rest. And you know what? This idea? It's downright terrifying. Even with all of my comments on this game though, Scanner Sombre itself is not a terrifying game, just more of a mysterious one. The game tries to put its own spin on the walking simulator aspects of the horror genre, and the scanner allows for the game to stand out among similar titles. The story is a bit uninspired, but it is also quite unexpected due to the game's brevity, allowing for a pretty cheesy game-concluding plot twist to still enhance the experience. I would still say that Scanner Sombre is a tough game to recommend. It clocks in at around 45 minutes in length, which is extremely short, even for the topic at hand. But I still really like this game, even if its length and simplicity kinda make it feel like a demo. I found this game very worthwhile. This game is clearly a cut above the other two, full stop. It has a great art direction, with some really phenomenal voice acting to accompany it, making Stories Untold have this extremely premium feel when compared to the other titles in this subcategory of horror. Stories Untold also happens to be a bit longer than the other two games, hovering at just over that 2-hour mark to complete, establishing this as the upper threshold of that brief horror moniker. The game is segmented into 4 separate chapters, each of which being their own smaller game, almost making this title an anthology of even smaller horror experiences.
Of course, there are through lines between all of these chapters, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Each chapter has a different setting. The first takes place in a vacation home, the second in a hospital laboratory, the third is in Greenland, and the fourth, well, I'm going to hold on to this for a little bit longer. The first chapter starts with this cinematic opener, akin to some sort of old sci-fi TV shows, booting you into this in-game text-based horror adventure immediately after. You experience the in-game game on a CRT television which oozes with that mid to late 80s aesthetic. The adventure starts off with the player showing up to this house in the middle of nowhere. You have been told that it's a holiday home of your family's which you happen to be visiting. You arrive, turn on the power, and head inside the home. Looking around at everything, the main character describes it all as if it were in perfect condition, clearly having nostalgia for the environments described. He is well acquainted with this house, and many good memories have been made within these walls. The game directs you towards the main character's bedroom, when the power just decides to inexplicably cut out. The program reboots, and it depicts a much more disturbing rendition of this household. The car is bashed in, the house is unkempt, and there are cobwebs all over the place. The character has a sister whose bedroom has been boarded up, and he can't even look at himself in the mirror. From here, you have to find a code which opens the combination lock that has prevented you from using your bedroom door. Once you collect it, you walk in and try to advance towards what you now see is yourself playing this text-based adventure. This marks the conclusion of the first chapter. The second chapter continues this trend of ambiguity, starting with the same introduction cinematic. It commences with you being given the task of dissecting an alien species. You find yourself within an operating room, and in it, you have many tools to break the specimen down. You conduct various tests on this organism, until this happens. You are instructed to open the chamber containing the alien by the voice heard over the intercom. This voice has guided you well so far, so you decide to open it. And after this decision, you find a foreign entity staring straight through you. It projects incomprehensible artifacts of its home world. You can't interpret any of this. At a certain point, you breach its memories, and you see the moments just after it crash landed on your planet. The craft destroyed beyond recognition, with police approaching the specimen being its final conscious memory, undoubtedly marking the moments just before this alien was captured. But what does this all mean? The third chapter commences. You watch the opener yet again, almost as if you were binging a show on your couch. You start this chapter on a secret base in Greenland, isolated in this small shack which resides in a boundless void of snow. Your job is to decode these confidential messages that your terminal receives. Doing this, you slowly uncover these disconcerting messages. New York has been blown out of existence, and some kind of hostile is now taking over. You have seen your coworkers go offline, and you assume it's the harsh conditions. Unfortunately, you find out, aliens, they're here! Your friends go off the grid one by one, and you're next. The communication tower is out. You heard the heavy footsteps of a foreign creature just above your structure. You get knocked over, and your body gets dragged outside. But then left behind? You proceed to repair the once broken tower, all while some of your coworkers are pleading for the main character to wake up. Something is definitely off, and this is solidified when you come back to find peculiar. The fourth and final chapter starts with the same exact cinematic.
I think that's enough of that for now.
You're in the hospital, but not just as a patient, but as something more. You soon find yourself on the other end of a tape recorder, with police officers pleading for you to confess. But confess to what? You retread all previous chapters to find a through line, and one that is quite disturbing to say the least. You think of your house, the car, the boarded up doors, the aliens, and the police which have haunted you in your previous stories. You finally remember what happened. You drunkenly crashed your car. You killed your sister. The worst part, you tried to frame someone else for your actions. You are the alien. Your behaviors, inexcusable. This wraps up the game, leaving the player in a state of shock after the credits roll. The character has been using TV to dissociate from their heinous actions. The main character's family enabled him to then abandon their only son for becoming the monster that they designed. This absolutely does not absolve the main character from their misdoings, as he still decided to act on impulse with no regard for anybody but himself at every possible opportunity. But this treatment, it does muddy the water. Stories Untold leaves the player to ponder upon these thoughts, as the game has now officially come to a close. Brevity helps these games in unique ways. Iron Lung's limited gameplay mechanics and world building only work due to the game's short length. Scanner Sombre's demo-like qualities are much more forgivable due to the game's 40-minute duration. Stories Untold, unlike the other two, would still be acceptable with a longer runtime. The style and voice acting will always stand out, and the story would still hit just as hard. Even with this praise, the game still does suffer from some of the same issues that have plagued the other two titles. It has gameplay which is far too simple for a long-form adventure, and it's a text-based adventure that has maybe the worst text recognition that I have ever seen. All the games which I have discussed are these bite-sized experiences, making them extremely digestible, allowing for the developers to take many more risks in regards to the game's mechanics and the administration of the narrative. It just so happens that these risks perfectly align with horror as a genre, as the out-there plots and different mechanics help these kinds of titles stand out in a sea of new releases. Brevity is a perfect match for horror, and these three games are perfect examples of why this is the case.
This outro will be slightly more off the cuff when compared to my other videos. So first off, I would like to thank everybody that watched my last one. I really didn't expect for anybody outside of the people I showed it to see it. So it's been surreal to see such positive feedback on the video. These projects take a long time to produce, and I wouldn't consider myself a great editor, so all of the responses really meant a lot. Regarding this topic, I try my best to not just senselessly spoil all three of these games. So if any of them look interesting to you, there's much more to these games, and I would urge you to try them out at some point. I would like to thank everybody who decided to watch this one. I thought that this topic would be fun to kick off the fall, and I hope you enjoyed it.